Hello and welcome to the fourth video in my series, What I Am Sowing Today from Seed. My name is Jenna and I am gardening in Midwestern Ohio, Zone 6A, with a last approximate spring frost date of May 10th. Today, March 15th, I'm sitting about 8 weeks away from my last spring frost date. Now, as I mentioned in my previous video, my schedule for indoor sown items stays pretty much the same from year to year. But the times that I'm planting out direct sown items can vary quite a bit in the spring based entirely on what our weather decides to do. This year, we've been sitting about 20 degrees above normal for the past week, so I'm sowing on the earlier end of my spectrum. But because this is Ohio, we will be dropping back down into the 20s several nights next week. But not to worry. Many of these cool season crops that I'm sowing right now can handle the cold. Now, for more on the average low temperatures that common cool season crops can handle, as well as ways to protect them when it gets colder, check out this video. But let's go ahead and talk about those outdoor direct sown items first. Now, a few things that I'm planting today, I already mentioned in my March 9th video, but I continue to do successive sowings. That includes things like lettuce, cilantro, and peas. I'm also doing my very last sowing of spinach today. I typically do not have good results with spinach when I plant it any later than about mid-March. Today, I'm also planting a batch of my all-time favorite purple Viking potatoes. The trick with potatoes is they grow and produce better in mild, cool weather. In fact, tuber production generally slows or shuts down at temperatures above 80 degrees Fahrenheit or so. But they are prone to rotting in cold, wet soil, and the top growth is susceptible to frost damage. I generally figure I can plant potatoes with good results from about mid-March to mid-April. Some years I can get away with early March, but if I want to plant that early, I often opt for container planting. This year, my soil is surprisingly dried out and quite warm already, so I'm going for it. I'm planting in a spot where I grew sweet corn last year. You can see I still have the straw mulch down, so I'm just clearing this back, hoeing a shallow trench, adding some aged sheep manure, and as my potatoes grow, I can use this straw to help mulch them and keep that soil cool and moist. To prep for planting, I cut my seed potatoes into sections with at least one eye per piece. Let them air cure in a protected spot for anywhere from a couple of hours to a couple of days, and I'm ready to plant. I'll continue with subsequent plantings over the next couple of weeks as the weather allows. Now, I don't currently chit or pre-sprout my potatoes, though I've come across several claims stating that doing so actually can speed up your harvest by a couple of weeks. It's one of those things that I intend to try every year, so one of these seasons I will add it to my list of experiments and see if it actually does speed up harvest time. I'm also sowing quick to mature radishes and salad turnips. With a maturity window of just over a month on these crops, these make a great candidate for succession sowing. I like to plant a small amount starting mid-March and then plant every 2 weeks until about mid-April. Radishes and salad turnips are relatively light feeders, and you don't want to overdo it on the nitrogen with these crops. But I find that top dressing my planting area with worm castings before sowing gives these roots the perfect boost of nutrition as they grow. Now today I'm using worm castings from Missouri Worm Supply and just broadcasting lightly over the entire planting area. I then just lightly cover and water these in well. I also sow my daikon or Korean type radishes this time of year, but keep in mind these typically take about twice the amount of time to mature as your regular round red radishes. Now I can't talk about root crops without covering carrots. Carrots also like cool, mild growing conditions, so the earlier I can get them sown and the earlier I can get them harvested, the better my results typically are. When I want to plant super early and the soil is still very cool, using a mini cloche or a makeshift humidity dome can really help to hasten germination. But if we're having a drier spring, covering the planting area with a board or damp burlap until the seed sprouts can help keep the soil surface hydrated and cool, which helps a lot in getting the carrots started more quickly. One other trick I love to use when planting carrots is to cover my planting row with worm castings. Issues with carrots can occur when the soil crusts over before the seeds have had a chance to germinate. I like covering the seeds with worm castings because A, they don't crust over, and B, just like with my radishes and turnips, this will give them a nice little boost without going too heavy on the nitrogen. And because I know I'll probably get the question, I'm not planting beets quite yet. I usually wait till the later part of March into the very beginning of April to plant beets. I think they would probably do fine if I planted them now, especially with as warm as it's been, but it's just easier for me to wait, so that's what I always end up doing. So now for the seed that I am sowing indoors. Now, first off, I did already mention sowing peppers and eggplants in last week's video, but I generally figure that sowing those up until about the middle of March is a good timeline for me. Now, I'm actually still waiting on a batch of seed, so those are going to get planted a little bit later than the ones I started on March 9th. But here in my climate, I should still get a harvest. It'll just be pushed back a little later in the summer. But other than those veggies, the big deal today is annual flowers. First up are my marigolds and zinnias. Now, while these favorite annuals can easily be direct sown in the garden, my personal preference is to start them indoors. It's easier for me to control the spacing and it helps me get a jump start on the bloom period. I generally try to get both of these flowers sown anywhere from the middle to the end of March. Now, if you prefer to direct sow, you'll just have to wait until all danger of frost has passed and the soil has warmed. Next up is Nicotiana, and this may be my all-time favorite annual flower for fragrance. An evening bloomer, this plant will fill your garden with an intoxicating jasmine scent. Just be sure to look for Nicotiana alata, also known as grandiflora or jasmine-scented Nicotiana. I don't find that the newer varieties have the same fragrance power. These tiny seeds can just be pressed into the soil surface rather than covered, as they require light for germinations. I'm also sowing snapdragons and sweet peas today. These are two annual flowers that I love the looks of, but I don't often grow as our springs tend to be so short and unpredictable. Once the hot weather hits, these flowers kind of go downhill, but this year I'm giving them another shot and we'll see what the spring brings us. I'm also starting an early batch of nasturtium today. Now, like the marigolds and zinnias, this flower is really easy to direct sow outdoors. I like to do one early sowing, again, just to kind of get a jump start on blooms, and then I'll typically do another direct sowing outdoors in about a month or so. And finally, I'm sowing my Rustic Colors Rudbeckia today, which I'm growing as an annual because it's only hardy up to zone 7. Honestly, I love the colors in the Rustic Colors mix, but for overall garden performance, I do prefer the variety Marmalade. I'm just sowing Rustic Colors today because I have seeds left in this packet to use up. That wraps up everything that I am sowing today in my Ohio garden, both indoors and out. If you'd like to follow along for the rest of the season and see my planting dates, be sure to subscribe to my channel, Growfully with Jenna. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.